Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ian Miller. Tonight we have with us another very special guest. Please welcome writer Michael Jan Friedman. Michael, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. I met Michael at New York Comic Con last month, and I asked him if he would be interested to come on the show, and here he is.
Here I am, beamed in.
That's So obviously you're getting ready for the holiday, right?
Yeah. My kids are coming for dinner, so that's great. One of them lives not too far, a little east of me, and the other lives in Texas. But
Oh,
he's in from Austin. He and his fiance for dinner. So yeah, we're excited.
oh, fantastic. Okay. I usually ask this with all new guests.
hmm
How did you get started in writing? What made you want to become a writer?
Well, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was reading comics, and eventually, you know, eventually books, like young adult books, and and there was something inside me that said I want to do that. I know that I'm communicating with somebody. I want to be the somebody on the other end. There was something that really appealed to me about that. Um, and I actually think there's people who are attracted to science fiction and fantasy and comic books. I really think that there's a talent for reading those, because you're taking in information and you're constructing worlds and characters based on, in some cases, just prose, right? Not even pictures.
Yeah,
And I think there's a certain talent for doing that. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that a lot of readers of science fiction, fantasy, and comics have an impulse to be writers of those things as well. It's just it's a ability to construct people and places and situations in their heads.
that's an honest answer, and it's a very true answer. I think a lot of writers, start the way you just described it. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was that my parents um, were had been as kids had been comic readers. They weren't the kind of parents that said, put that stuff away. You have real work to do or real reading to do. They were very much supportive of reading comics, and they read a lot. And I saw them reading, and I said, that's if they're reading a lot, there must be something good about about the people who are writing what they're reading.
yeah. So obviously they encourage you to, try to pursue something along this lines.
Well, let's say they didn't discourage me.
Okay.
They encouraged me to read. They figured reading is reading. Whatever
Yeah.
you read is good. They didn't encourage me to be a writer. In fact, they wanted me to be a doctor.
Oh.
Funny because I have two younger sisters who both went into allied medical professions,
Mhm.
uh, probably because they heard my parents talking to me about, "Don't you want to be a doctor? Is that not something you would consider?" And they probably heard that and said, "Oh, that's what we should do." But I didn't have that gene. I wasn't at all interested in becoming a doctor. Um, but I actually didn't think I'd become a writer. I wanted to. I had the impulse to write, to create stories, but I didn't know anybody who was a writer. Uh, Nobody in my neighborhood was a writer.
Mhm.
Everybody worked, in the garment district or real estate or something like that. And so I knew people wrote because I could see their name on the book. I
Yeah.
just didn't think it would ever be me. And then Isaac Asimov came to speak at my college, and somebody said to him, are you a full time writer? And he said, yes, I am. And he had previously not been a full timer. He had worked as a professor and so on. But at that point, he was a full time writer. And I went, wow, if he could do that, you know, maybe someone else could do that. Again, not me, but
Yeah.
someone,
Yeah.
you know. And and then circumstances were kind to me, and I got the chance.
What was the first thing you ever wrote, though?
The first thing that ever got published, or the first thing I ever wrote.
I would say the first thing that ever got published, because I'm sure you've had a lot of number of stories that you've written, before you got published.
Some actually surprisingly few. I worked on a fantasy story in college.
Mhm.
Uh, didn't get published. And then I wrote a humor column in college, and a guy I knew came to me and said, when you write your first novel, because of course, you're writing a humor column. Of course, you're going to write a novel. And when you write your novel, you come to me because my family has a literary agency, and when I graduate, I'll be joining the agency. So I wrote a book, and it was a swords and sorcery book based in Norse mythology, and I called him at the agency, and he goes, Mike, he goes, you really wrote a book, really? And I said, yeah, and here it is, and you said you'd represent me, so take a look. So he got back to me real quickly and said, Mike, this could be the next great science fiction classic, or it could be a pile of horse manure. I don't know. I don't read this stuff. You're going to have to go to somebody who does. So he referred me to somebody else, and I called this other agency and said, I'm a new writer and I have this manuscript, and they said, well, we're not taking on any new writers right now. But being from New York, I couldn't let that slide. So I said, don't you want the next Stephen King? And they said, well, actually, we're very happy with the current Stephen King. So I said, okay, so you're Stephen King's agent. I wish somebody had told me that. But tell me where I can go. Tell me, give me another lead. And so they did, and they sent me to this other agency, which ended up, a woman there, Karen Haas, read my manuscript, liked it, made some suggestions for beefing it up here and there, and took it to Warner Books. And very shortly after that, I get a call from her, and she goes, Mike, I sold it. I was like, wait, I didn't hear you. Could you say that again? She goes, I sold the manuscript. I was like, it was just a game changer. It was just a game changer. All of a sudden, my life, all along, I'd been telling people in college, if I could just write one book, I'll die happy. Just give me the one book. And here I had sold the one book. And in fact, at Warner, the editor, a woman named Kathy Malley, um, actually asked me for a sequel. And we were at an Italian restaurant, and with my agent and her, and she said, "Yeah." She goes, "You kind of left it a little open ended, and I'd like you to write a sequel." And I said, "Sure." It had taken me 2.5 years in my spare time to write the first book. And she said, "Well, let's see, it's April. Can you have it by October?"
Oh,
And I started to say, "Yeah, like no way." And my agent kicks me under the table and says, "Absolutely, Mike can do that." And afterwards, I said, "How am I going to do that?" So I ended up I had a full time job as a business journalist, and I ended up cannibalizing my job. I I would take long lunches, long bathroom breaks, and sneak in, writing here and there. And eventually, after a few weeks, my publisher called me into his office and said, "Mike, not for nothing, but do you still work here? He said, well, I've been kind of busy. So he gave me he was kind enough to give me a couple of weeks to get my stuff in order there, and then I was all perforce. I was a freelancer and
Wow.
working on this book, and I finished it. It was the first book was The Hammer and the Horn. The second one was the sequel was The Seekers and the Sword, and then finally they asked me to do a third book, which was the Fortress and the Fire. So that was my Vidar saga trilogy. That was the first thing I ever did.
That's incredible. Especially going from literally just going out of college and pitching it to a literary agent, and then eventually somebody saying yes, and then having it saying they publish it. That had to have been a very out of body experience right there, because you're like,
It was crazy. It was obviously a beautiful experience, but it was
yeah,
crazy. It was the validation that would have made the difference. Sometimes I have nightmares, and I feel like, oh my God, it's all been it was all my imagination. I'm not a writer, and I never was, and it's a nightmare. And then I wake up and I go, thank God, you know, uh, that didn't happen that way. But it was a critical thing in my life
yeah,
to become a writer.
yeah. So obviously you followed that success in the trilogy there. Did you work on anything else that was original, or um,
I, I did. I had after the trilogy, I did a single novel called The Glove of Maiden's Hair, and also based on Northern European mythology, more or less. And then, so that was 4 books with Warner. And by then, Kathy Malley had retired, and her protege had taken over. And I had ideas for books, um, for more books, and I went in to speak to him, and I said, yeah, so I've got some ideas. So next, I'd like to do, and he goes, Mike, let me stop you right there. He goes,
oh,
oh, your books did pretty well, but not so well that we think we want to continue the relationship. He goes, you got to make room for the next guy, and so good luck. And I was
oh,
like, wait, that's it? That's it? Is that it? That could be it. That could be it. And I was thinking, okay, so I said I'd be happy if I published a book, and I published 4, and I got nothing to complain about. And it was very depressing because I
yeah,
thought I had a career going, and then not. So, and this is something that happens actually a lot too. You're called an orphan if your editor leaves and somebody else takes over, and they've got ideas about people they'd like to publish and so on, and now you're yesterday's news. And so I was very depressed, and fortunately, a couple of days later, my agent, um, who had represented me with these other books, called me and said, have you ever thought about writing a Star Trek book? And I said, yeah. As a matter of fact, I've been reading Star Trek books. Anne Crispin and Howard Weinstein were a couple of my favorite Star Trek writers.
yeah.
Uh, I said, yeah, uh, I I kind of have, like, in not seriously, but I kind of thought about it. And they said, well, there's an opportunity. The guy who's running the program, David Stern, uh, liked your trilogy, sent him the trilogy, liked your writing, and would like to see you do an outline for a Star Trek book. And I went, like, this could be cool. So I wrote an outline for Dave, and I called him. I said, "So, what do you think?" And he said, he goes, "Mike," he goes, "this is exactly what we're trying to avoid."
Oh,
He goes, "It's like fantasy, it's Scotty, it's Scottish mythology. We're kind of dealing in science fiction here." And I said, "But you liked my trilogy. That was swords and sorcery." He goes, "I liked your writing. I wasn't looking for a swords and sorcery story." So
oh,
I went back to the drawing board and I did another outline. And this was based on the original series episode, "What Are Little Girls Made of?" And it was Kirk, a Kirk android, had been overlooked, and he gets to Kirk and some of the other characters are on shore leave, and the character insinuates himself into the group and replaces Kirk and beams up to the Enterprise, and now he's in charge of the Enterprise. And Kirk is lost. So I wrote that outline and I gave it to Dave, and I said, "So what do you think?" He goes, "Mike," he goes, "this is now we're talking. Now we're talking. Just one thing." He goes, "You didn't give me an ending." And I said, "I didn't want to spoil it for you." He goes, "No," he goes, "Yeah, I'm a professional. You can spoil it for me. It's okay." So I wrote the ending. This had to do with Romulans and so on, and he liked it. And I wrote it and he published it. So that was my first Star Trek book. And then it kind of went from there. He said, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, "Well, this next generation show is coming up. I'd like to do a next generation book." He goes, "Great." And it was just one book contracts, one after the other after the other. I ended up doing like 35 Star Trek books.
that's incredible.
Go figure.
Yeah. Um, Especially with when I actually brought it up at New York Comic Con, which was Shadows of the Sun.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I've read this many times, obviously, because I liked how you've shaped the story, even the characters. You can hear their voices in each line. And you're like, wow, he really channeled into that. Um, since I brought that up, can you talk a little bit about the making of this particular one?
Yeah, what happened is we had a meeting with some of the people from the um, licensing department at Paramount. Paramount had the rights at the time, and so there were a couple of women who were there, and they came over as guests, and uh, I and a couple of other writers were invited to attend this meeting, and where we talked about the idea of doing hardcovers based on some of the original series characters. And we were thinking, Uhura and Scotty and McCoy maybe. And I said, "Oh, I want to do McCoy." Well, that was the only one that actually ever got written. Yeah, I mean the other they were doing other things and they kind of like slipped away. But I got to do the McCoy background novel, and there was a lot to invent. There were a few hints here and there, but there was a lot that I could fill in, and I had a great time with it. There were flashbacks and so on, but the contemporary story. I said, okay, so what's the opposite of McCoy? If I had to pit him against something, what would it be? So he saves lives, and what about putting him up against the society that takes lives? In this society, the highest virtue, the most respected people are assassins, and so they take lives. He saves them, and I didn't want to make them cardboard villains. I wanted to give them a real, as solid as I could, a rationale for being great assassins, and so it was sort of an equal conflict. and of course I brought in his wife and her new husband, and I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, especially when you're having, McCoy kind of pulled at different sides because he's dealing with his past, obviously, in two very different ways in the book, and just hearing his experiences on the planet, compared to what he was going through with his divorce from his wife, it was like, wow,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had the benefit of there being a McCoy. If there hadn't been a McCoy, I couldn't have done it. So that was one great thing about Star Trek, and to some extent also other franchises that I've written for, but Star Trek in particular, I was able to bounce off things that already existed and shine lights in dark corners. That's my favorite thing when it comes to a franchise. Is what we got some clues about something, but we don't know much about it. Let me construct a story about it,
yeah,
and I did that with Reunion, which was the story that brought Picard back together with his crew from the Stargazer, his first command. It was a murder mystery on the Enterprise D, guest starring all these characters from his original command. Only one of whom had we heard anything about on the series. There was an episode, The Battle,
yeah,
first season episode, The Battle, and we heard about a character named Vigo, though we never actually really saw him. And so I constructed a crew and had a little stuff about Jack Crusher, and that was based on that book. Um, I did other Stargazer stories. I did a 6-book set of Stargazer stories, and other authors picked up on that. And when I wrote the Next Generation comics, I included them in those. So um, I felt like I had my own little corner of the Star Trek universe to myself.
yeah. Like I always tell, even with you writing, especially not just in Star Trek but in other books, you were able to channel the characters that you created and really gave real life, situations and problems, which I've always admired, because if the dialogue is as real as it gets, then the audience really gets it. They're really connected to what's happening.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's when it comes to the dialogue, there's actually some keywords. You know, like if I say, um, uh, uh, "Come in to see me," you go, that could be anybody, right? That could be anybody. Who knows, right? But if I say, "Come in to see me, number one," now you know who that is, right?
Yeah,
And all
exactly.
of a sudden, it sounds like Picard. So there are certain key words that you can use to make the characters sound like the characters you know,
Yeah,
and that's kind of an art, you know. Um, but yeah, yeah, I liked bouncing off those established things, and that was the most joyful part of Star Trek for me, and of
yeah.
course, of course, coming up with crews. That's the guilty pleasure of every Star Trek writer is, oh, I can come up with a crew. Oh, cool.
Well, yeah, because you come up with the characteristics, you can come up with the names. You can even come up with any ships that they're commanding or serving on. That's not connected to the Enterprise. And you're like, it's really like your little kid in a toy store. You get to play with
Yeah,
the toys.
exactly. You get to play with the toys, and you get to play with your own toys. This is great in
Yeah,
the Star Trek universe.
yeah,
Uh, so yeah, yeah,
yeah. And during that point, also that period of time, you also did adaptations of television episodes like Relics and All Good Things.
right, 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 right. Yeah. the thing with the thing with any adaptation is for every hour of screen time, more or less, whether it's a movie or a TV episode, for every hour of screen time, it translates to about 60 pages in the book. So if you have a 2 hour episode like All Good Things, okay, so that's half your work done for you. All you have to do is turn script into prose.
Yeah.
Uh, if you have an hour, it's not even really an hour of screen time with something like Relics, you've got to come up with 3/4 of a book, and it has to kind of fit. It can't it can't feel like padding. It has to feel like it could have been part of the episode. So for
Yeah.
Relics, what I did is I called Ron Moore, who was the writer of the episode, and I said, "So, what did you want to put in that you weren't able to put in?" And he goes, "Well, he goes, we shot a scene. It's in a script here somewhere." And he sent me the scene. It was a scene I think between Troy and Scotty. And then I said, "So what else?" He goes, "Well," if the budget allowed, we would have put in this and this and this, and probably an adventure down on the Dyson Sphere." So I said, "Cool," and I just took his suggestions and turned them into prose. So I was able to flesh that out without it seeming like, again, like padding.
Yeah.
But adaptations. I love adaptations, but I did an adaptation of Batman and Robin,
Mhm.
George Clooney
Yeah.
debacle, and uh, and that was a lot of fun too. The funny thing is, so I said, I was a fan of the Denny O'Neil Batman, who was basically an urban legend.
Yeah.
And here they were kind of harkening back to almost to the Adam West Batman, and it was very campy. And I said, I don't like this. Let me turn it more serious, urban legend y, and so I did whatever I had to do in the plot to make Batman and Robin more like urban legends. And there's a scene in the Flower Ball, the Society Ball,
Yeah.
uh, where where Batman and Robin are standing there in the movie, just standing there, like
It-
so, right? So I put janitor outfits on them, so nobody would know they were Batman and Robin, things like that. And I said they're going to kill me. The approval is going to be a bloody brutal thing. And they didn't. They didn't make me take out any of that. What they did make me take out was I said, I'd like to call him the Batman because that harkens back to the original comics.
yeah.
And so every time I said Batman, I said the Batman. They made me take out the definite articles.
Oh,
Took out like 150 thes. Made the book about half the size.
oh my God.
But
It's just a small thing. Just a small thing.
yeah, yeah. But it added up. And so adaptations, had a lot to do with who you were working with. Some studios could really care less what your adaptation is. It's a small thing for them, and others are meticulous
Yeah.
about what making it true to their franchise.
There's actually a good learning lesson, especially for writers, that are doing adaptations to any type of media property, especially when you're doing research. Oftentimes you get to see and read, scenes that were taken out of, the scripts, put back in the novels to say, well, you know what, this actually makes better sense than what we actually saw on the screen.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
so, yeah,
we worked. I worked with my friends Peter David and Bob Greenberger on a thing called After Earth,
yeah,
which was based on a movie that made by Will Smith and Jaden Smith, and the movie had some issues, but we wrote a couple of books based on the movie. And there, we were writing the Bible for franchisees. So we really had a very deep working knowledge of what they were doing and how they were doing it. And we were able to come up with some good stories apart from the novel itself,
Yeah.
from the screen
The,
itself,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But but there they were very, we were in with them, and they were very understanding of what we were trying to do.
Well, I imagine, just the ideas of, that the movie actually gave you guys, you were like, okay, let's just, take what we learned from this, but also just expand it, to say, okay, how do we expand this universe?
It was a little easier in that case because we had invented the technologies that went into the things they were doing in that movie.
Yeah.
They had hired us to do the Bible, and so they had a weapon. How does the weapon work? We came up with a way for it to work. This terrible beast they're up against. How does that work? We came up with that. So in writing it, they couldn't say that's not how the beast works. It was like, well, we kind of came up with that
Yeah.
background, so it was a little easier in that case.
I can imagine. Yeah, because again, they're trying to figure it out as well. So you guys were like, okay, this is how it should work. This is how these things should work.
Yeah, yeah, and they were good partners.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about, your career in comics for a second here. Obviously, you've written a number of Star Trek comic stories, but you also worked on other DC and Marvel titles over the years.
Right. Well, mainly I wrote Dark Stars.
Yeah.
What happened is my favorite solo characters in DC at DC Comics were Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
And so it was my birthday, and I came in to have lunch with two of my editor friends, Bob Greenberger and Brian Augustin. And we were going to Mickey Mantle's restaurant. So it was a really cool day we had planned.
Yeah.
And I figured as long as I'm coming in, I'm going to pitch some inventory stories to the Justice League editors. And they didn't, it wasn't really the best time. They were really busy, and they couldn't really listen. So so I was a little disappointed, and we went to eat, and Bob and Brian said, "Well, what is it about those characters that you really like?" And I said, "Well, Martian Manhunter, kind of the last of his kind. He's an alien. Green Lantern, I like the whole Green Lantern Corps idea, and the power he had by virtue of his ring, and both science fiction concepts, not a coincidence."
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, what if you put those things together? What if you came up with one character that had all those qualities?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And we came up with it there at lunch. We came up with the idea for Dark Stars, which was whereas um, the Green Lantern Corps had been put in place by the Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy, and but the Guardians, and we were thinking, well, maybe the Dark Stars were created by the Controllers, which was a kindred race, and the Controllers want to control. The Guardians want to promote growth and so on, and the Controllers just want to control.
Yeah.
So, so we came up with the Dark Stars, which was kind of an alternative to the Green Lanterns, and so I was able to write 39 issues of that series before it got canceled. Um, and the irony is, when it got canceled, I think we were selling enough copies that by today's standards it would have been a moderate success.
Uh,
Uh, but you know, but it was not today; it was then, and
yeah.
said, "Oh, we could do better." But anyway, but I had a great time working on Dark Stars. Worked with some great artists. Unfortunately, none of them stuck for very long. It was like they were kind of shuttling in and out until finally, after about 20 issues, I hooked up with Mike Collins, who's a terrific artist from Wales, and we've maintained our friendship since then. And so I think of him as the artist creator of Dark Stars because
Wow.
he actually stuck with it.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was great, you know, coming and, you know, we incorporated Donna Troy as a Dark Star for a while. We had John Stewart was a Dark Star for a while. And so we were part and parcel of the DC universe. That was cool. So that was most of the work I did outside Star Trek. I also Brian and Mark Wade kind of brought me in to help them out with Flash a little bit. So I did several issues of that. Um, I did a couple of issues for Marvel Remix
Yeah.
with Ruben Diaz, and that was a retelling of um, the story from Fantastic Four. I think it was 57 and 58.
Mhm.
Uh, the Power Cosmic, the Theft of the Power Cosmic by Doctor Doom. And I did that with Sal Valuto, who's also a good friend still. And so, yeah, I did a little bit of stuff outside Star Trek.
Yeah. I would say so.
And I,
Um,
and I did that Dead Man story for Mike Carlin, which was part of Legends of the DC Universe annual, where I wanted to do a Dead Man story. It was a murder mystery that took place in the circus because when Dead Man was alive, he was a part owner of the circus,
yeah.
and it was going to be a it was going to involve the freaks in the sideshow. And Mike Carlin, who was editing that title, said, "Well, then you have to see the movie Freaks." And I was like, "I don't know. It's a 10-page story. I mean, do I have to do all that research?" He goes, "Oh yeah, you have to." So I did, and it made it a better story. And I'm forever indebted to Mike for doing that because that's a story I can still look at and be proud of. It's not just another piece of work. So that actually worked out really, really well. And he also hooked me up with Eduardo Barreto on that story. Eduardo was a tremendous storyteller as an artist, and so that worked out really well.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I remember you started telling me the story before the show started. Obviously, with Mike introducing you to Freaks to make sure that the Dead Man story was the best that you could deliver it. And
Right.
just hearing you tell the full story now, it just goes to show you, research definitely
Yeah,
a must.
yeah. Even in a 10-page comic story,
Exactly.
it was good. It was good. You know, one of the things I'm doing now is Sherlock Holmes stories.
Really?
Friend of mine, yeah, friend of mine, Chris Abbott, um, is a Sherlock Holmes master writer. He's just got a knack for it, and he said, you know, I want to do an anthology of Holmes stories with a couple other writers, and I want you to be one of them. And I said, Chris, I don't know that stuff. You know, that would require a lot of research. And he said, well, he goes, I think you'd be good at it. So I was like, oh, okay. So and sure enough, I did the research and I came up with great stuff. And I was so inspired that I actually wrote not only that home story, but I wrote another one in the next anthology called those anthologies are called Cases by Candlelight. And then he did a third anthology, and I contributed to that as well. and we're currently, one of the projects I have going on right now is Chris and I are collaborating on a Sherlock Holmes novel.
Wow.
So I'm kind of hooked in this stuff, and I have Chris to thank for this.
Now, are you thanking him? Just they're gonna say, or are you just thanking him to
I
say,
might I might have to kill him, but I'm grateful that he hooked me into this because I really didn't think I'd be any good at writing Victorian detective fiction. But it turns out, something. I always find that I know, and not just I, but people in general know more than they think they know about
yeah?
things. And so it turned out I knew a little more than I thought.
Well, here's my feeling about it, Michael. If you're talented enough in one genre, you could do any genre.
Okay. uh, I'll take your word for it. I don't know. I think there are some genres I might not like horror.
Well, yeah. There is a couple of ones you probably don't want to see. Why steer away from?
Right. But yeah, yeah. So I mean, and then there are genres where I feel very much at home, and I feel like uh, you know I know exactly what I want to do and exactly how to get there. Um, like for instance, I'm working on a book called Empty Space Betrayal, uh, which is a sequel to a graphic novel that I did, which I happen to have right here.
Ooh,
Um, and it's called Empty Space.
wow.
The idea, and it's a beautiful, beautiful graphic novel, rendered by a guy named Caio Cacau, who is a Brazilian
Oh,
uh, artist. Just great stuff.
yeah.
And the concept there is that these ships that go out from Earth to defend Earth against alien species who might be hostile toward them, um, they go out in to far flung parts of space, and they don't have time to come back to Earth or even to Earth stations to replenish their crew. Right? They just have to stay out there. So what do? They found a way to resurrect dead crewmen. And
Ooh.
they can only do it once, and it doesn't last forever. But they have a way to resurrect them. The problem is they don't have emotions. They lack their emotions, and excuse me, um, and they only last not more than a year before they go crazy and die. So the protagonist is a guy who wakes up on the ship, and he was a hero years and years ago. He was a hero in the fleet, um, and it's been a long time, but they've managed to resurrect him, and so they call them empties because they're devoid of emotion. So hence empty space.
Okay, I had to pick up a copy of this. I had to pick up a copy. Just the concept alone is exciting. I had to pick up a copy.
So I'm about halfway through the prose novel, and it's interesting. It's a really interesting technical, from a technical perspective, because the original graphic novel
Mhm.
is is written in the first person present. I wake up, I look around, I don't know where I am. I see this. It's happening right now, and it's first person. And and I've seen that done in comics to good effect. Mark Waid did it in The Flash,
Yeah.
and and I've and so I like that, and I was able to do it, use that for Empty Space. But now that I'm writing a prose novel, it's a different animal, and the idea of writing first person present for 300 pages of
Oh,
prose is just too. I just feel like it would make the reader uncomfortable.
yeah.
So I had to find a way to have that kind of intimate relationship with the reader without using the first person present.
Hmm.
I ended up using, what most people use is the third person uh, past, but but bringing in bringing the reader into the protagonist's thoughts so much that it feels like it's that same sense of intimacy.
That could not have been easy to do that, though.
Not easy at all. Particularly in the beginning, as I was trying out different possibilities. I tried the first person present. I tried the third person present. I tried the first person, past, and then one of the problems was in a novel, it's hard to tell it all from one point of view, no matter how you do it. So I wanted to make it more of a tapestry and bring in the perspectives of at least a couple of other characters, and so that you have secondary arcs, and um, and I couldn't do that first person present. So it was really a problem. It was a challenge. It was a challenge, and I think I've met it.
Well, that's good, and definitely keep going, because again, um, take the story as far as you can take it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mentioned when we were speaking off camera, I mentioned that most of my projects are in conjunction with Crazy Eight Press. Crazy Eight. Let me find a Crazy Eight logo here. Okay. So Crazy Eight Press. See that like eight?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's the logo that we use for our Crazy Eight books. In Crazy Eight, I work with 10 other professional writers, and we publish our own fiction. Very, very seldom anybody outside of our group,
Yeah.
but um, but we work together to promote it and publish it, and we try to create work for each other. And so we started this in 2010, and we've got about 80 titles now in inventory uh,
Wow.
between me and everyone else. And it's great stuff because we're writing the stories that we really want to tell, the stories that we would really want to read,
Yeah.
frankly, if we could. So it's so close to our hearts that we're doing our best work. And I've written, I want to say 10 books under the Crazy Eight logo, and edited 6 more shared world anthologies, like this one. This is this is the Phenomenons series, and it's a superhero series with each, and it's very interesting. Each writer got to create their own character. So you have some characters with standard power sets, like super speed or something like that.
Yeah.
But you also have characters with very non-standard power sets. So our super speed character is a guy who was abused as a child. So even though he has a standard power set, he's not like any speedster you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Um, and when it comes to non-standard power sets, we have a character named Lipstick Lily, who's written by Marie Vibert, who's a terrific writer in Cleveland. And Lipstick Lily fights crime with an array of specialty lipsticks. I guarantee you've never heard of anything like that. We try to be as original as we can in everything we do, and sure enough, um, Lipstick Lily's pretty pretty original, and
Uh,
and it
wow.
actually works.
Okay, I definitely have to add to my Christmas list now of things I have to get now. And if folks, if you don't know what we're talking about, here's the link below to Crazy Eight Press. It's impressive titles, but with very impressive writers that you know, writers that you love, and I would just check all this out because it just sounds fantastic.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's great, and they're great. The people that I work with in Crazy Eight Press, my fellow writers, are all not just great writers, but great people.
Yeah.
So it's really like a a, a work of love.
Well, yeah, because again, you're telling stories that are yours, that you always wanted to tell, and expand on ideas, that you've always had in your head. So yeah,
So to give you an idea, one of the um, franchises that I created under Crazy Eight Press is the Astlon series of murder mysteries. Years ago, I took this to a friend of mine who was an editor at Del Rey, and and I said, well, this is a 21st century Aztec Empire noir murder mystery. And she said, I love that idea. I can't buy that idea, but I love it. So when you publish it, you send me a copy so I can read it. Because can you imagine me taking this to a bookstore buyer? It's a 21st century Aztec Empire noir murder mystery. His head would explode. So,
yeah,
so yeah. But at Crazy Eight Press, we don't need to impress an editor. We don't need to distribute through bookstores. We do it through Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, and the margins are much better for us in that case. And so we don't need to come up with the same numbers that a that a traditional publisher would need. We can work with a hundredth of that and still do very well.
yeah, I can see why, because yeah, you're really working with the consumer, as opposed to the publisher, which is, I think, always a smart thing to do because you can just count the middleman.
Well, when we started Crazy Eight Press, Borders had just gone out of business,
Yeah,
and um, and we saw that the relationship between the writer and the reader, which is where the magic happens, right? Um,
yeah,
that was endangered all of a sudden, and we didn't want. We felt it was our responsibility to nurture that as much as we can. So we've done that. We've maintained that link. We do a lot of Kickstarters where we get the support of hundreds of backers in our projects, and um, we, as best we can, we maintain that relationship between reader and writer.
yeah. Well, I'm certainly glad you did because again, otherwise, we wouldn't have, a lot of work from you guys, especially original work.
Right, right. Yeah, and it really is. It's really original. I mean, I oh my God, I have a story in one of my recent um, collections. I do collections of my short fiction, and
Yeah,
in one of them, I have a story named Trash Talker. It's called Trash Talker, and I guarantee that the reader has never seen a story like this ever. I'll bet my house on it. No one has ever seen a story like this. And then there are others, that are also original. I did a story called Floaters
yeah,
because, because floaters are these little things that you get in your eyes. They're when you get older,
yeah,
and they're little pieces of viscous matter that belong in the back of your eye over the retina, I think,
yeah,
and they kind of break off a little bit. It's no big deal. If I focus over here at this focal length, I can actually see some floaters.
Yeah.
In the normal course of events, I don't even know they're there. I have to like, oh wait, are they still there? Oh, they've moved. Now they're over here. Now they're over here. And so I did a story called Floaters, right? Also, I don't think anyone's ever done that. So we really do try to be original and entertaining and maybe a little thought provoking as well.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you guys are doing that, and definitely keep doing that because you give guys like me, hope. So I really appreciate that.
You got it. You got it. And I mean, it's not like we could stop. You know, it's a disease. You just can't stop.
No, 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 no. Because once you have that itch to tell your own stories, it just keeps going.
It does, like a runaway train.
Exactly. And hopefully, with the rest of the books that you're working on right now, it's a successful runaway train.
Yeah. So far, so good.
Yeah, like I would.
Right. Right. I'll do that.
Well, Michael, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to me and talking to all of us.
Sure. Sure. My pleasure. Really. Really. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And as always, with I have with all my guests, that have any projects that they want to promote or any Kickstarters, you're welcome to come back on, to talk about, and I can help promote.
Good. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah,
We have another one coming up in about 6 months or so. So I appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah. Keep me in mind. Keep me in mind.
Sure. Sure.
Okay, and before we go, folks, as always, I like to do my own plugins to my own stuff. So let me just show off a little. This is my own comic, Codename Hunter. It's a sci-fi spy thriller. Picture James Bond meets Star Trek meets Star Wars with a dash of Guardians of the Galaxy, and you get Codename Hunter. As about the adventures of a secret agent named Sean Wade is battling, intergalactic terrorism as well as domestic terrorism. Right now, we've got 3 issues right now on Indie Planet. So far, we've gotten great reviews. I'm working on issue 4 right now. So that's the script's all written. I'm in the process of penciling it. I'm not sure if you can see right now. Then I'm going to send it to my inker, Enrique Lopez, and he's going to work his magic on that. So keep an eye out for that, for the news on issue 4. And since the holidays are coming, I want you to go and check out tpublic.com. Type in Little Ian merch, and you'll find my designs in t-shirts, coffee mugs, pillows, wall art, even cell phone covers. And since the holidays are coming around the corner, you have a slew of Christmas stuff, like the Christmas cookie interrogation. Then there's also the ever so popular I Did See Santa Claus. Yeah, so check out on teenpublic.com. And I think that's going to be it for us tonight. And as always, since it's the holiday this week, happy Thanksgiving to all of you from all of us at Triple Threat Comics.
Yep. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. You have yourself a good night, folks.